Good morning. It is about 38 degrees outside right now, so don't mind me being all bundled up like this, and you'll see the steam from the coffee flittering by. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break this up into 3 parts. And what I want to do is to cover each section of evil that you've been in the middle of discussing, working on projects on, to kind of help you have a better understanding of them. And the 3 different theories of evil that I want to go over with you. First is the privation theory, and then second is Nietzsche's theory, and then third is Hannah Arendt's theory. And all these 3 theories have something in common in that they attempt to tackle head on that there is such a thing as evil. It is a common temptation, I think, and I see this in many students, it's a common temptation to think that just because we can't answer something easily, it therefore doesn't have a correct answer. And what I want to do is challenge that by giving you 3 different ideas or ways of thinking about evil. And 2 of them are a little more head-on. One of them is a little more descriptive, but that's also because that's just the way that philosophy takes its course. So the first theory is probably the most important theory, and it's what's called the privation theory of evil. Now, when I say it's the most important, what I mean is for you as a student in a classical school, this theory is going to be the one that is most prominent and most closely relates to classical ideals. So by classical ideals, what I mean is a theory of human nature rooted in the tradition of Aristotle. And that's really the foundation of classical education, is that there is such a thing as human nature, and the way we understand this nature comes out of the tradition of Aristotle. So the privation theory is most closely related to the Aristotelian tradition. And the privation theory of evil goes like this, that evil is not necessarily a positive thing in that it doesn't exist on its own, but it only exists as a sort of parasite on the good, on things that are good. Things that are good are bent in such a way that evil is the result. So one thing to keep in mind, and this is actually going to be really important when we discuss Nietzsche's theory, is that all human beings by nature seek the good. So I go over this at the beginning of the school year with all my students, and I'll remind you of it now, that all human beings, without exception, are constantly seeking what they believe to be good. Now the question is it a real good, or is it only apparently good, in that it seems to be good, but it's not actually good? So all human beings seek the good, and evil is just in an improper way, you might say, although I want to be careful with my language here, of arriving at what a person believes to be good, although the end itself is not necessarily good either. So let's start taking a few examples. When someone commits murder, the person who is doing the murdering actually believes that what they're doing is a kind of good. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. They think they're going to get something out of it. Maybe monetary gain, right? Financial reasons. Maybe because they want the exhilaration, the rush, the adrenaline. Maybe they just want the experience of having done something. Maybe they want someone out of their lives. Right? I mean, that is what murder really is. They want someone out for a certain reason. So they're still seeking something they believe to be good, but it's not actually good. It's only apparently good. And so what happens is that when we act we often act according to various sets of morality, of ethics, and the way we understand morality in our setting is the Aristotelian tradition, which is that morality is about human flourishing. How do humans flourish? So let's start bringing this back to the idea of evil as a privation of the good. I'm going to tell you a way to think of a privation, and I'm going to tell you why that's wrong. So one way to think of a privation is a lack of something. So if you looked over the slides that were given to you, darkness is the absence of light. However, the term lack is maybe not necessarily as specific as we want to get. So let me give you an example from our patron saint of the classroom, Thomas Aquinas. This is an example I go over, especially laters with the juniors and seniors in my class, that a rock lacks sight, but a blind person has a privation of sight. And the reason Thomas Aquinas uses that example is because it's not in the nature of a rock to be sighted. A rock can't have sight no matter what. It's not in its nature. Whereas it is in the nature of an eye to be able to see. It is in the nature of the human eye to let in light. So a blind person has a privation of sight because it's in the nature of the thing to be that way. So the privation theory of evil goes something like this, that we are to act in such a way that is good, but when we do not act according to our natures, evil is the result. This is why human flourishing and morality and ethics are so closely related in the tradition of Aristotle. Because it is a part of the nature of human beings to do the good. All humans seek the good. And without exception, every decision we make is because we think that it is good. Now, we can be wrong about what we think, but that's what we think. So the privation theory of evil says that evil is a privation of the good. Now, here's what we don't want to say. We don't want to say, well, then evil is, there's no such thing as evil. Because that's obviously not true. People do get murdered. People do have things stolen from them. Injustice actually happens. So we don't want to say that there's no such thing as evil in a kind of way. However, if you read Boethius, he will say that evil is a kind of nothing. So let me tell you what I think is a really good way of thinking about this. And again, when you get into your junior and senior year, I go over this a little more clearly, and this becomes really important. That the way we know something is by understanding its end result. I'm going to say that again. The way we know something, in part, is by its end result, what Aristotle would call the end or the final cause. That's partly how we know what something is. The end result of evil is the absence or the privation of things. So let's consider Hitler's Germany, because when we look at Hannah Arendt's theory of evil, this is going to be an important part of this. When you look at Hitler's Germany, Hitler wanted the master race, right? He wanted the perfect people. And his goal was to exterminate people who were not a part of that. So the handicapped are gone. The Jews especially, because Hitler was a conspiracy theorist. The Jews, gone. But the problem is that there's no such thing as the perfect person. So, if you take Hitler to his logical conclusions, he is going to exterminate more and more and more people Until eventually, what he probably would do is what he ended up doing, which is shooting himself. And when you seek a society in evil means, what you would end up having is no society at all. It would be nothing. There would be nothing left. Every human being would be gone. So the end result of Hitler's evil would have been nothing, right? An evil society, when pushed to its logical conclusions, will cease to exist. Give me 1 second. All right. So this is the privation theory of evil. That evil is not a positive thing on its own. It only exists in relation to the good. And it exists because people are confused about what is truly good and what is apparently good. And the way to be someone who can recognize what is truly good for Aristotle is going to be wisdom, prudence, being able to discern in this particular moment how a human being flourishes, what it means to flourish. So this is a very light and brief introduction to the privation theory of evil. That evil only exists in relation to the good, and it's in many ways the absence of the good. It's the privation of the good. It's a resistance to the good in many ways. But it's a privation because of the nature of human beings. It's a privation because it is in relation to a nature. It is in relation to the nature of human beings to do the good, because humans, without exception, are always making choices because they believe that choice is good. And sometimes we choose lower goods over higher goods, and sometimes we choose false goods instead of true goods. But we're always seeking goods. So this is the privation theory of evil. Next, we're going to talk about Nietzsche's theory of evil, and then Hannah Arendt's theory of evil.